Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm putting out a Real Thoughts on April 1st, so this must be a joke. Well, it's sort of a joke. I mean, I wasn't going to do a Real Thoughts on Halo Reach, but I thought it'd be funny to do one today. But my opinions expressed in this video are my actual opinions on Halo Reach. And I want to warn you, if you enjoy Halo Reach, you're probably not going to enjoy my opinion on Halo Reach. And that's okay. It's opinions. Nothing I say is absolute fact about the game, and I don't want to have to go through a bunch of comments that say that my opinion is wrong, you know? You can disagree with it. You can disagree with my opinion. You can make arguments about that the things that I don't like are specifically the things you do like about Halo Reach. I just don't want to hear, oh, well, your opinion's shit because blah, 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 whatever, who gives a fuck. I don't like Halo Reach. If you've watched any of my other Halo Real Thoughts, I think I've mentioned this several times, but to me, Halo Reach represents the absolute bottom of the Halo series. Maybe Halo 4, that's sort of worse in other ways, but Halo Reach was sort of the nail in the coffin of where Halo decided to go as a series. To me, my favorite parts about Halo are, number one, the Halo ring, and number two, the sort of goofy action comedy thing, because you're a big giant green man with a little blue lady and like quippy sidekicks that help out sometimes, like Sergeant Johnson, you know? So when they decided to do a Halo game that was focused on not a Halo ring, I already wasn't that interested, but also they decided to completely change the aesthetic of the series from this sort of bright and colorful like they had done in Halo 3 to a more drab and very closer to, that like brown tinted shooters of the era. So it looks less unique, I think, to the other Halos. The overall aesthetic changes of the Spartans I enjoy. The problem was everybody is so fucking dirty. They're so covered in scratches and mud. It was so ugly. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed about having the Reach stuff back in Infinite was they were nice and cleaner, and they still had, some wear and tear, but they weren't so grimy that it looked like they had never taken care of their armor and dragged themselves behind a car for like 6 weeks. I also didn't like what they did to the elites. They decided to try and redesign the elites to make them look scarier, and they mostly just look wide. The Halo Reach elites have the widest heads of any of the elites in the series, and I think it's an unpopular opinion, but I think they're just as ugly as the Halo 4 elites in a different way, but they're still not good. The overall aesthetic design of their armor was interesting for some of them. Some of them were pretty ugly. I think it's the Elite Generals. I think that armor is kind of ridiculous, especially with the big rhino horn. But the good armors they brought back for Halo Infinite, and they were fitted to a much sleeker Elite design, and they were brighter colors, and I think they looked really good. I think just the campaign of Halo Reach is lackluster. You're focused on the squad of people, but you never really get to know any of the people in the squad all that well, because the game is only about 5 hours long at most. And so you don't really spend a whole lot of time with anyone. And the only character the only character death that really serves the plot is George, and everyone else's death is just for shock value. And you might think like, oh, well, Carter, sacrificed himself to stop a scarab or whatever. But like in Halo 3, Master Chief stops like 4 or 5 scarabs single-handedly, and in ODST, a single ODST stops a scarab. So the fact that we don't even get to fight a scarab at all in Halo Reach is that's sort of one of the things that's very weird about that, especially because you can shoot the cores of the scarabs in Halo Reach and they start to blink, but the scarabs don't die, which was very odd. And every character death is verbatim just their character archetypes. The captain goes down with his ship. The close quarters guy dies to a stabbing, close quarters. The brains get shot in the head. The stealth guy disappears. I know June doesn't actually die, but that's still part of the whole thing. And then the heavy weapons guy or demolitions expert dies in an explosion. I also think it's kind of hilarious, the sort of narrative dissonance with George, that he's supposed to be like this, big likable guy, but I always thought he really hated the soldiers on Reach, because there's the mission where you go into the big EM field with the tower that you destroy, and Anti-Dot, the AI, tells George that there's an electromagnetic field, and then George orders the pilots to fly right into the electromagnetic field, which disables the Falcon, and they all crash and die, and then he just doesn't care about that at all. And then if you're playing on the mission where George dies, you can have soldiers alive at the end of that mission who presumably just die with George that he doesn't give a fuck about. So I always make a joke that George really hates the soldiers. And then everybody's familiar with Kat's death. That doesn't make any sense. And to the point where a lot of people are misinformed that it was because of the glassing that caused an EMP to her shields, which is not ever mentioned anywhere. That is not official information. That is some fan theory that became known as official information, but that is not the case. Her death is never actually explained. Emil's death I also thought was kind of ridiculous, because not only does he let a phantom just fly right over him, he straight up isn't paying attention to the elites that are coming up on him, and they're not exactly being stealthy. So he does his cool, revenge stab on the elite, but to have gotten to that point at all is kind of ridiculous. Also, on the mission where Carter dies, the mission begins with Carter injured. They don't ever explain why Carter's injured. There's presumably some cut content there, and they didn't add any fill-in line to sort of explain what was going on. I had always thought it was the Banshees that were chasing after them that had injured Carter right at the beginning, but if you watch the scene, he's already injured before the Banshee even fires, so that's not it. And then they try to do the whole tease of the insurrectionists for all of about 5 minutes before they reveal it's the Covenant again. Also, that was the first game where the grunts don't speak English, which is one of my favorite parts about Halo. I was so glad that they were back in Infinite as their old quippy selves, and they were so great in that. But they just speak some random language in Reach, and that wasn't very interesting. I think the weapon balance in Reach is also very poor. I think most of the sandbox is really, really bad, to the point where you're pretty much just going to stick with the DMR the entire campaign if you can get away with it. That or a heavy weapon. The new sniper sucks absolute dick. The new Covenant rifle that's not the classic Covenant rifle sucks absolute dick. The Covenant grenade launcher thingy is awful. Just that kind of thing. That was also the point where they started putting hexagons on all of the Covenant stuff. Literally every piece of Covenant machinery in that game is covered in hexagons, and to the point where it gets kind of ridiculous. But to me, having a Halo ring in Halo is important to the aesthetic, because part of what was cool about Halo was running through a mission and being able to just look up in the skybox and see this giant ring, because that's not normal. That's a really unique aesthetic thing. And I know Halo didn't invent ring worlds, but when you see a ring world, it's been so ingrained that it's a Halo thing that people will immediately compare it to Halo, especially if it shows up in another game. I know they showed off Arc 2, and that was on a ring world, and people were thousands and thousands of comments were oh, it's Halo. That's how important the Halo ring is to the Halo series, because it's its namesake, And so there's you see the Halo from CE at the end of Reach, but you don't ever go on the Halo ring. And I think I know it's not about the Halo ring, and that's why I don't like it. I also think the music is mostly forgettable. There's a couple of tracks that are okay for all about 30 seconds before they start to loop. The first time the whatever special elite shows up and he kidnaps that girl. That music is cool until it starts looping, and it just goes loop and loop and loop and loop for about 5 minutes, and so you've heard it plenty by that time. It just starts to get really annoying. Same with the beach where you're going to the Saber program. That music is not great. People like the main theme. I think the main theme is fine. But also Halo Reach's development just seems very distracted to me, because that was the point where they were half and half working on Halo Reach and working on Destiny, because they had started work on Destiny during ODST, which was also during the pre-production of Reach, and they were full on like working on prototypes of Destiny while they were working on Reach, and it really feels like that to me, because the writing suffers, the characters are complete cookie cutter, and it just seems like they didn't care about Halo, because I feel like at that point they kind of really didn't. And I know this never mattered to me, but I know a lot of people who don't like Reach, that because the story of Reach changes the events of the book Fall of Reach, which had already detailed the lore of what had happened to Reach. I think personally, because the games were the first type of media, games shouldn't be beholden to the books anyways, so they should be allowed to retcon those kinds of things. I know 343 has been trying really hard to like not retcon any of the extended universe stuff in their games, which is commendable, but I don't think it's that important to have to stick 100% to the books. You can change things for creative reasons in the games, because the games are what determines the lore first and foremost, because they're the first thing. I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, maybe if you didn't like the campaign, you got to admit like the multiplayer is the best in the Halo series, but I also don't agree with that. I think armor abilities are stupid. I think tying sprint to an armor ability was kind of ridiculous, because if you ever look at the metric that they had for like what armor abilities are used the most, I think it was like 80-something% was just sprint, which is an absolutely overwhelming amount. And sprint was poorly balanced for a lot of the maps. You could get across maps really, really quickly, and there were so many ways to sprint cheese, where you would sprint, punch somebody, be able to sprint again, and then punch again before they could react. I remember that being a big problem. People always like to meme about armor lock or whatever, but sprint was so much worse about balance. I also think most of the Halo Reach maps that were original were not that good. There were a couple of the remakes that they had done which were fun, but a lot of the original maps seemed like they weren't all that well designed. And also a lot of the maps were just reused maps from the campaign, which I feel like they did so that they didn't have to care too much about Reach, so they could cut development time down and work more on Destiny. So the fact that maps were reused so much, it was like campaign missions would be reused for firefight or whatever, and I think there were a couple of campaign missions that were used for multiplayer maps, made it feel less unique, because every other Halo didn't do that. They had maps that were aesthetically similar to campaign maps, but they were still unique, so that was kind of lame. Yeah, I don't know. So obviously, if you like Halo Reach, I'm sure a lot of the points I've said are things that you do like about Halo Reach. Like, you do like that it's darker and grittier, and that is what I don't like about it. So feel free to enjoy Halo Reach. I just don't. And I don't think I ever will. I've slowly felt less positive about it over the years, because just having replayed it on PC, I played it several times with friends, and it just doesn't stick with me. There's a lot of forgettable stuff in Reach that I only remember because I have played it so many times now with friends. And I still think that, Halo 2 and 3 are the peak of the series, Halo 2 being the most memorable and Halo 3 being the most fun to play. Well, anyways, thanks for listening to me rant about Halo Reach for 15 minutes.